There is a reason why so many men feel like they are always one step behind in relationships, as if they are playing a game whose rules were never explained to them. It is not a lack of character, it is not bad luck, and it is definitely not destiny. It is a lack of understanding of forces that work beneath the surface, forces that do not ask for permission, do not follow moral fairness, and do not care about what you believe love should be. The discomfort begins when you realize that much of what you were taught about desire is a convenient story, not a functional truth. When Arthur Schopenhauer described the world as will and representation, he was not trying to please anyone. He was explaining a mechanism. According to him, human beings are not guided by high, rational decisions, but by a blind, ancient, and impersonal force he called the will. This force shows itself as impulse, attraction, obsession, and illusion, especially in the sexual realm. What people call choice is often just execution. What they call emotion is often a biological command. This will has no morality, it does not reward effort, it does not recognize kindness, and it does not respect emotional sacrifice. It uses romance as bait, passion as fuel, and idealization as anesthesia, all to serve a single goal: to continue the species in the most efficient way possible. When you truly understand this, something inside you breaks, because it becomes clear that desire is not born to be fair, it is born to function. Schopenhauer was labeled a misogynist by men who confused description with judgment. He was not attacking women. He was exposing a system that operates through them just as it operates through men, of men as well. The difference is that some men learn to observe the movement of the will, while others are dragged by it, believing they are in control. Most people prefer to call this love, because the truth requires emotional distance to face it honestly. Decades later, modern evolutionary psychology only confirmed what he had already understood without laboratories or charts. Desire works by functional criteria, not romantic ideals. It responds to signals, not promises. It reacts to perceived value, not declared intentions. When you try to negotiate attraction through emotional effort, the will interprets it as adaptive weakness. The response then comes as disinterest, tests, or silence. This video is not an invitation to resentment, it is an invitation to clarity. It is not about hating women, it is about no longer being controlled by illusions that always place you in the position of the one who waits. Understanding replaces confusion. Adjustment replaces fantasy. When you understand how desire is actually organized, something shifts in your inner axis. You stop seeking validation and begin operating with clarity. And that silent, cold, strategic change is exactly what transforms how you are perceived. The dark truth that few accept does not make you bitter. It makes you aware. And a conscious man does not beg for desire. He positions himself in such a way that desire has to reach him. Perfect. The flow continues immediately within the same chapter, without internal numbering or labels, maintaining the same rhythm and density. There is a behavior that appears harmless, even noble, but in reality functions as a biological trap. It is built on the romantic illusion that desire grows through sacrifice, patience, and emotional consistency. This belief feels comforting because it aligns with moral stories, but biology does not respond to comfort. It responds to efficiency. Noble on the surface, but corrosive on the inside, this pattern is practiced by almost every man without realizing it. He believes that constant affection, continuous effort, and emotional devotion are the ultimate proof of masculine value. He gives himself before being invited, invests before being tested, and explains before being asked. The problem is that desire does not read intentions, it reads structure. When you offer everything without resistance, the unconscious message that fills the space is not care, but predictability. And predictability, in the realm of desire, is a silent form of erosion. When Arthur Schopenhauer described romantic love as a trick of the species, he was not being cynical, he was being precise. What a man calls elevated emotion, the will uses as a tool. Passion appears, attachment intensifies, the mind creates stories, all to push the individual to behave in a way that serves the biological objective. There is no emotional contract in this process. There is guidance, And the more a man believes he must prove his value through emotional self-giving, the further he moves away from what awakens genuine desire. Female desire does not respond to good intentions, moral speeches, or promises of eternal care. It responds to signals of inner stability, psychological strength, and emotional independence. The will of the species does not evaluate who you wish to be. It reacts to who you show yourself to be when you are not trying to convince anyone. That is why so many men are rejected even though they are polite, available, and emotionally open. They offer safety before they offer tension, and desire needs tension in order to exist. Research conducted by David Buss over several decades shows that initial female attraction is organized far more around the perception of value, autonomy, and behavioral dominance than around explicit empathy or emotional effort. The body responds first. The mind creates the justification afterward. The masculine mistake is trying to argue with reason what was decided at the instinctive level. Here is the break that few are willing to accept. It is not the kindest man who awakens desire, but the man who does not negotiate his emotional value. The man who does not adapt compulsively, who does not reshape himself to fit someone else's desire, who does not explain himself in order to be accepted. He does not need to harden himself, humiliate, or dominate anyone. He simply remains whole. And that integrity creates a psychological friction that activates curiosity, respect, and attraction. Longitudinal studies conducted between 1994 and 2019. These findings reinforce the pattern in an uncomfortable way. For those who still believe in the romantic myth, initial female attraction depends far more on the perception of autonomy and self-direction than on open displays of emotional empathy. This does not mean emotional coldness. It means emotional economy. A man who gives everything all at once shows more lack than presence. The practical application of this is simple, but it requires inner discipline. Pulling back premature emotional investment is not becoming distant. It is becoming selective. It is acting like someone whose life is already structured, whose inner axis does not depend on a woman's response. This completely changes the dynamic of interaction. When you behave like someone who invites rather than someone who asks, desire stops seeing you as a candidate and begins to evaluate you as a possibility. There is another pattern that repeats with uncomfortable precision. The more a man reacts emotionally to ambiguous signals, the more ground he loses in the dynamic. Long silences, cold replies, subtle shifts in mood, or small withdrawals of attention act as invisible pressure. The average man experiences this as personal rejection and enters a state of alert. He speeds up his messages, looks for explanations, tries to restore the connection, and without realizing it, he reveals exactly what desire watches with suspicion: a lack of inner control. The root of this rejection is not the isolated action, but the reactivity behind it. The female body reads emotional responses even before any conscious interpretation occurs. When you become disorganized in the face of uncertainty, you signal that your inner axis depends on external behavior. Emotional dependence is interpreted by instinct as risk, not moral risk, but adaptive risk. Desire does not negotiate with anxiety, it moves away from it. From a biological perspective, these tests are not conscious games or manipulative strategies. They are filters. Emotional pressure appears to observe how a man behaves when there are no guarantees. The will of the species needs to know who remains stable when the ground becomes unstable. Schopenhauer was clear on this point. The man who is dominated by the will reacts. The man who dominates it observes. To react is to be guided. To observe is to maintain inner sovereignty. This is why the idea of female games is often misunderstood. It is not about cruelty, it is about automatic selection. The rational mind tries to explain afterward, but the body has already decided. The man who loses his center while trying to understand what is happening places himself in the position of the one being evaluated. The man who holds silence, posture, and his own rhythm changes the invisible hierarchy of the interaction. He stops being tested and begins to be observed with caution. Research in social neuroscience indicates that male emotional self-control significantly increases the perception of competence, safety, and attractiveness in social interactions. Studies associated with Stanford University show that men who can regulate emotional responses under pressure are perceived as more trustworthy and more desirable regardless of physical appearance. The brain links inner control with leadership ability, and leadership, at an instinctive level, is eroticized. The practical application of this understanding requires more silence than words. Training a slow response is not a social trick. It is nervous discipline. Holding a neutral posture in the face of provocation is not indifference. It is psychological maturity. Maintaining comfortable silence is not absence, it is condensed presence. And there is one rule that separates men who preserve desire from those who destroy it. Never seek emotional clarification during a test. The one who asks for explanations gives away power. The one who observes keeps it. When you stop reacting automatically, something shifts in the field. The tension does not disappear, it moves. It leaves you and transfers to the other side. And it is exactly in this transfer that desire begins to reorganize itself. Up to this point, you understand the logic. But understanding is not the same as mastery. Most men consume content, recognize patterns, agree with the ideas, and then continue reacting in the same way. In the same way when he is put under pressure, because the problem is not isolated information, but the absence of a system that organizes behavior, emotional reading, and decision-making under stress. The Code of Seduction is not a motivational course or a collection of scripted lines. It is strategic training designed to teach how attraction actually forms at the psychological and behavioral level. It shows how to read signals before they turn into rejection, how to maintain emotional control as tension rises, and how to position value without displaying need or excessive effort. These are advanced practices that are not widely shared because they require maturity, self-control, and inner clarity to apply. This code is not for those who want to please. It is for those who want to stop being driven by emotional reactions and take control of the dynamic. Those who enter learn to act with precision where they once reacted on impulse. They learn to hold silence where they once over-explained. They learn to be desired not for what they promise, but for what they transmit. Anyone who feels they have already understood too much and applied too little knows exactly why the next step is necessary. Desire is born from emotional scarcity, not from availability. There is a mistake that does not look like a mistake because it is socially rewarded. The man presents himself as present, predictable, accessible, always available. He responds quickly, adjusts his schedule, anticipates desires, and believes that emotional consistency builds value. What he does not realize is that in the field of desire, excess predictability pushes a man into the position of the safe option. And the safe option does not awaken attention. It brings calm, and everything that only calms eventually stops being desired. Schopenhauer saw the fate of fulfilled desire with uncomfortable precision. For him, the will desires as long as there is resistance. When the object gives itself completely, the impulse fades and boredom appears. Not because the person has lost moral value, but because psychological value depends on contrast. What requires no inner effort stops being the focus of instinctive attention. Desire does not attach itself to what is guaranteed. It moves toward what has not yet been fully conquered. Here, another reversal appears that few accept. It is not physical absence that creates desire, but psychological independence. You can be present and still be scarce as long as your life does not orbit around female validation. The man who has his own direction, a structured routine, and clear priorities carries a quiet form of unavailability. He does not disappear. He does not pull away in a dramatic way. He simply does not give emotional access before real reciprocity exists. Research on self-determination conducted by the University of Rochester shows that perceived autonomy significantly increases interpersonal attraction. When the other person feels that you choose to be there, rather than need to be there, perceived value changes. Desire responds to inner freedom, not emotional dependence. Autonomy creates respect. Respect sustains attraction. The practical application of this principle requires inner reorganization, not external tricks. Prioritizing mission, routine, and personal progress over female validation is not motivational talk. It is psychological strategy. When your energy is invested in something greater than immediate approval, your presence becomes heavier, your communication becomes more direct. You speak less, justify less, explain less, not because you want to seem mysterious, but because you no longer feel the need to prove yourself. The man who understands this changes the dynamic without announcing it. He does not cut contact to create absence. He builds a life that naturally limits his emotional availability, and that limitation is not perceived as rejection, but as value. Because desire does not chase what begs, it moves toward what does not need. Conclusion: master the will or be ruled by it. Schopenhauer never tried to comfort anyone. He did not write to calm frustrated men or to justify romantic expectations. He wrote to expose a mechanism, and what he revealed remains uncomfortable because it hits the male ego exactly where it prefers illusion. Love was not designed to save you. It was designed to test you, your inner control, your clarity, and your ability to remain grounded when the will tries to take command. Male failure in attraction does not come from a lack of qualities, but from the wrong posture toward desire. A man tries to be chosen when he should be whole. He tries to convince when he should hold his ground. He tries to please when he should simply exist with his own direction. By doing this, he gives away the center of the interaction and begins to operate from lack. And lack, at the instinctive level, is never eroticized. The dark truth is simple and freeing at the same time. The moment you stop seeking approval, you change category. You stop being abundant and become rare. Desire does not organize itself around those who offer too much, but around those who are not emotionally available without criteria. This change is not external. It begins when you remove the center of your identity from female validation and place it back within yourself. Seduction is not pleasing. Seduction is not needing. It is being present without depending, desiring without begging. It is holding your own axis even when the other tests, provokes, or pulls away. Women do not respond to the man who over-explains, over-justifies, or tries to be understood. They respond to the man who controls himself because inner control communicates safety, direction, and value without effort. This is where the code of seduction enters, not as another collection of phrases, prefabricated lines, or social tricks, but as a system for reading the will in action. A mechanism that teaches you to recognize patterns before they drag you along, to maintain emotional structure under pressure, and to build a presence that does not depend on the other's immediate reaction. It is not a method to conquer women. It is a method to stop losing yourself in front of them. The one who understands the will stops being played by it. The one who masters this code does not react in the dark, does not over-explain, and does not negotiate his value. He observes, decides, and moves with precision. The difference between men who keep trying to prove something and those who become desired is not in appearance, luck, or words. It is in who learn to control the internal game before entering the external one.